Paul, do you want to start?
Okay, so very briefly, obviously I'm a fellow analyst at Kubinger Cole. I specialize in my day job in the future of digital identity, and I'm an ex-CISO many times over for global corporations. What do I see in terms of futures? For me, the key is understanding context. I mean, we've heard it before. It's this entitlement and context thing. If we're going to make this stuff work, whatever technology you choose to employ, if we're going to get better at it, we need to get contextual analytics better. At the moment, context is really, really difficult, especially if the devices and the people are outside of your control. So it goes back to this locus of control thing. I can make it all work as long as you play inside my locus of control. And there's the flaw. So if we're going to design for the future is how we can understand global context. Can I leverage a global identity ecosystem for devices, code, people, organizations, agents? And the answer currently today is no. And that's what we need. If we can fix that, we can put a huge dent in the bad guys.
Okay, Dragan?
Hello again. So before Accenture, you've heard from me, but before joining Accenture, I've been in the business for about 25 odd years. Spent some time with some startups in the space of emerging blockchain technology. I don't know if you heard of GuardTime as a blockchain company. Before that, I was with KPMG and Chief Security Architect with Diageo, the drinks company. So from my perspective, I feel that we're seriously flawed in the departments of identifying what do we need to protect. All of this good stuff and technology that we have in existence today really kind of falls apart unless we have a target, unless we have a really kind of a view. What do we try to provide to business? What are those things that we need to protect? What are those digital assets? How do we traverse multiple realms of trust and data proliferation, which is very important? If you ask anyone today to safely kind of lift their hand and say, I know exactly where my assets are, please talk to us, talk to me. I want to really learn from you. And that sort of veracity aspect, which really Paul was talking about, the context, is really kind of providing the integrity element of it. The provenance and the context is really critical for the data veracity that we're trying to aspire to. How do I know the artificial intelligence system will be presenting or really kind of working on a trustworthy set of data? How do you know the data is complete and unchanged? For something to happen. Do I put a brakes on a car based on that element of data set? Or do I really kind of run over a person in front of me? So that really is critical, and I think is shifting from the space of cybersecurity to safety and is saving people's lives, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Thorsten?
Yeah, Thorsten George, Chief Evangelist at Centrify. I've been doing security for more than a decade. A lot of time involved in risk management solutions, governance, risk, compliance. And for me, it's important when we talk about this topic of risk, that risk is security's new compliance. In the past, a lot of organizations were very focused on that checkbox mentality. Fortunately, over the last few years, we have seen them move towards a risk-based approach. And for me, risk comes back to context, because risk is determined by multiple factors, by vulnerabilities, by threats, and you have to take these into account. And then going back to the fundamentals of cybersecurity, for me, there are two things that you have to get in line, and that's identity and that's data. When you look at today's cyber attacks, there are only 0.6% of attacks that strive to take down your network. The rest of the time, they're there to exfiltrate data. So in reality, I could make a bold statement and say, I don't care if you're my network. What I care about is that you're not exfiltrating my data and that I know who is trying to do it.
Okay, so thank you. So we already touched on one of the former presentations, the term of zero trust. And So when I look at what you've just been saying, it is we need to understand where our assets are, where our critical assets are. And Paul, you yesterday brought up a statement saying usually there are maybe 20 really critical IP addresses, so to speak, in going down to the network, but at the end systems where really your crown jewels, so to speak, reside. So the interesting point is obviously, shouldn't we, a little bit provocatively said, knowing that there are few really critical systems and assets, put a very strong fence around exactly these systems as sort of the parameter which would be sort of, you could say that would be contradictory to zero trust.
I think the world has changed. I think up till 6 years ago, yeah, we had these 20 IP addresses that we knew about. But today I can pull out my credit card as a marketeer. I can subscribe to a SaaS service and I put all my customer data there, and my IT guy doesn't know about that IP address. So things have dramatically changed. And from that perspective, I can no longer build a fence. I have to apply a concept that allows me to verify who's accessing what and really put limits on that.
So what you're saying is we have a sprawl of crown jewels, and we not even know in which tresor the crown jewels are, in which bunker we have our crown jewels, so to speak, and that means we have to change the concepts.
So, no, I don't think so. I think the fundamental truth hasn't changed, which is if you move all your marketing data in the cloud, which is what happens in reality, that just becomes one of my 20 critical systems. It's just not inside my network anymore. The fact that we still need to protect it and potentially in a zero trust network environment front end it with something that says, here's the conditions under which you are allowed to access this data. I think the fundamental truth is still the same, because it's what you should have been doing when the data was inside. All that you've done is move it to the cloud, and the reality is that people are moving more and more. If you look at my future state network I drew up, the only thing I had inside was SAP. Because, and even then, you can probably move that to the cloud these days. But ultimately, my suspicion is for a lot of organizations, you're going to want to closely couple your production to your ERP system with a known degree of quality of service on the network between the two. But that's probably about it. Everything else, let's assume it goes to the cloud, but let's put the same amount of protection in front of that to do the, and I like that SailPoint were using the entitlement word. So the entitlement is a great word. We coined it originally for Cloud Security Alliance. If you look in guidance version 3, it's a great word because it says that, are you entitled to access this data?
So I would agree from the security concept. I think what I'm talking about is really the challenge of knowing that this data resides at this outsourced SaaS application. That is really the challenge that the practitioner face every day.
Just for kind of few points there, I think what is important with moving the data, externalizing the data, is that you actually you affect your effectively kind of what happens. Your architecture changes, your data flows changes, your footprint in terms of what you're looking at now in terms of interactions, that really multiplies. So although you've changed physically the location of the data you deem important, the things you'll be doing internally no longer really applies. You have principles still the same, you still have same objectives, but achieving that level of security completely changes. Picking, what people are talking about, maybe somebody mentioned earlier, but cloud access security broker, CASB sort of came up into the kind of focus of this because cloud-to-cloud interactions are now a reality. How do I know that your stuff that is already in service now in Concurs and HRs everywhere, Workdays, how do you know that data is not really kind of using for other purposes? How do you know that that stuff is really not exposed to an authorized or, entitled party to see the data? So that really put things into perspective of your data provenance elements for data, kind of data security. What happens, do I really know how data moves around? So do I really kind of safely say, guys, I have no idea?
Yeah. So what you're basically saying are two things. The one is it's still the same critical data, but we don't know, or it's not stable in the location anymore. Let's phrase it like that. So in former days, it was in our data center. Right now, it's somewhere. I think that's a challenge, but it's a matter of fact that it's still certain types of data which are to be considered critical. And I think we also can discuss which data is critical and what not. I'm not a big believer in that. So, and to which extent is it critical? So there are the aspect of what happens if you lose the data, or what can you do with the data? And the other thing is how critical is it to have always access to it. So I, for instance, don't believe that HR is a system where you have a high availability requirement the same way like you have on a factory floor. So if your factory floor, so if your belt stops, it costs immediately money. If your HR system is down a day, yeah, it's a problem, but it will not kill your organization. And so I think there are different ways, but that's one part of it. We need to understand what is critical, and we need to get better in understanding where it is. And due to the fact, and that's what I take from particularly what you said at the end, that this flows and the locations of the data and all this stuff are different, we need to apply other types of technology, because we can't just say, okay, it's always there, and because it's in the data center, we put something around the data center, but because all this is far more volatile, we need to be more flexible, and that's where provenance, where context and other stuff comes in. So at the end, that would mean, yes, we need what commonly is called zero trust security, and probably is better and interpreted as a lot of elements in security, a lot of pieces we build together to have sufficient trust. Or would there be another interpretation of what zero trust security really is?
Again, I would say it's a change in the mindset. And when we talk about data flow, and when we took the example, I'm moving my stuff into shadow IT, it's a change of mindset. As an IT security professional in the past, I was overprotective. I created rules that were very restrictive, and if I'm restricting somebody, they always will try to find a shortcut. So I have to change my mind and leverage technologies like CASBs that are non-intrusive. And I can tell you, marketing department, we're completely open that you sign up for a SaaS application. The only condition that we have is you use a CASB, and that satisfies our policies. Yeah. CASB is non-intrusive. So that's a change of the mind, and that's the important part.
Is it not also part of, I think I brought this up as well, part of this change in mind that, so you've talked about the overprotection, I think, which is one element. So we create firewalls until no one understands the firewall rules until no one understands the firewall rules anymore, which is, I think, the reality with most firewalls factually. But it's also, I think, shifting away from this all eggs in one basket approach we, so to speak, had in security. So we'll build one thing which is super secure, but if this breaks, we have scrambled eggs. And saying, okay, we move more towards something which is, we have a lot of baskets which help us to protect things. And then at the end, probably with less attention to the single basket of eggs, because if one egg or one basket of eggs falls down and the eggs break, okay, we have some scrambled eggs, but we still have a lot of eggs which aren't scrambled yet. Isn't it probably, from an analogy perspective, also that part of thinking?
Yeah, I think a layered approach where we account for different use cases. I mean, I'm not just a privileged user, I'm also an end user. So I should be exposed to different ways that I'm authenticating. And by doing that, I put basically a layer on top of it. And even if I'm privileged users, I might have measures that run in the background that make sure that if somebody compromises my credentials, there's a backup that kind of picks up on the intrusion and alerts me. So it's really layering the approach and not having one approach that applies for everything.
But I'd probably argue that this is not an IT or even a security problem. Ultimately, this is a business problem. So the original definition we were talking about yesterday, for those who weren't there, and I said this is something I inherited when I started as CISO at AstraZeneca. They said we have a critical set of 20 systems, and their definition was very simple: is it share price affecting? Forget anything else, forget the technology, forget the GDPR or what went before it or anything else. If this goes wrong, is it share price affecting? So yes, if you lose tons of highly sensitive data and it gets out of the market, yes, it's going to be share price affecting. If our production system goes down or we produce tainted drugs, yes, it's share price affecting. It doesn't matter, it's what works for your business. But that was their definition. And that works really nicely. So I'd argue if you take that definition and say, if I choose to go out with my corporate credit card as the marketing department and I choose to take one of the data out of one of those 20 systems and move it into the cloud, and I do it arbitrarily without telling anybody and the business doesn't know about it, actually you should be sacked. It's as simple as that. It's got nothing to do with IT or anything else. It's the fact that the business needs to understand where its critical systems and critical data is, and if you want to go move them, it better be part of our strategy.
Dragan.
Another point on this is that we should perhaps look at security in this context, zero trust or digital truth, as a business enablement services. What is essentially the problem? I think we constantly kind of really portraying this as the notion of some sort of a level of compliance, some sort of risk mitigation sort of service that we provide to the business. Yes, of course, this is the sort of given. But what is really kind of difficult to portray to business people and sort of asking for the budget, sort of, okay, we need to invest into here and there, this is what we want, is really reflecting this in the context of what kind of confidence you're providing to business they will be there tomorrow. What Paul was saying, what is the impact of this, us being able to sustain growth? Can we sign up 2 million more customers in the next 2 years? Can we diversify our products in the sense that we can still use 5,000 times more partners to support us without breaking our architecture and security models and principles and everything that we have in place? I think this is ultimately the key for all the security professionals. Can you safely go back to your business and say, you know what, guys, next 10 years from now, we're good, okay? I know that there's not going to be major disruption or whatever, but if you do an acquisition, merger with something, how painful is that process of integration? How painful is that sort of aligning both organizations to the same level of a notion of security? Can they champion security, especially if they're sort of at the lower maturity level? If you look at that from that perspective, that is really painful. So giving back that sort of enablement and thinking about truly being flexible and always in flux is the key. And I feel we do have products and services to give us that perspective on how we enable the business, but we tend to forget those things from time to time, which is a bit annoying. So yeah.
No, I completely agree. I think with all the data breaches that we read about, we have been so focused on protection, that we forgot IT was meant to support the business, to run the business. That was the core function, not defending it. And so finally, you have the opportunity with a zero trust model to really architecture your environment that supports customer transaction, supports partner transaction. In my presentation earlier, I showed some of the results. We run a survey among a couple thousand customers and prospects where they started implementing Zero Trust, and based on that, they were far more confident in dealing with their vendors, in signing on remote workers. They were no longer worried that there would be insider threats, and Google is a good example. They haven't seen any threats since they deployed their Zero Trust model. There have not been any phishing attacks at all, zero. And that's published. And it's also important, going back to the DevOps initiatives, to really incorporate that into Zero Trust model, because that's really empowering your business. That's the agility that you need.
Is it not even exactly that point, which would lead us to more the security design aspect as well, that there's a very tight interplay between DevOps or DevSecOps on one hand, and the entire agile business, digital transformation and so on. You can take one buzzword after the other, and the Zero Trust security. So without Zero Trust security, the other things will not really work. But on the other hand, they need to understand this concept of Zero Trust security as well to finally work. Because if we say we offer all of that and they do just what they want on the other side, I would doubt that things really end up in what we expect to be an agile and secure business.
So one of the tricks behind doing this is, if you like, a set of patterns. So, first of all, we talked about this yesterday in the risk workshop, was understand at what level risk should be signed off for whatever the risk is. So you need to sign it off high enough to actually get the right level of approval, but low enough so that the person signing it off actually understands what they're signing off. If you can get that bit of magic happening, and you couple that with a set of patterns for if you're going to deploy this kind of service with our current architecture, whether it's hybrid or fully deperimeterized or fully Zero Trust or whatever you want to call it, with our current architecture, this is the pattern I should use. Now, to put that into practice, exactly what Torsten was talking about, within the marketing department, they are allowed for their data to take the risk, because it's their data, according to this pattern, which is you must put, if you're going to put it in the cloud, you must put it behind this CASB. So here you have a very nice, agile, you're letting them, because they're the correct people to take the risk because they know about it, do what they need to do agile business, with security signing off saying you will use this CASB because we're happy that meets our overall security plan. And that's a really neat, agile, risk-minimizing way to work for a business in the future. And you can adapt that, so when your architectural pattern starts to change, or you say our architectural direction is to move fully Zero Trust in 5 years' time, today we're going to use a CASB, but in your roadmap you've got, and tomorrow or 3 years' time we'll be using this type of product, may not exist yet. But it's going to have these attributes to deliver this business functionality that we need to do this and enable that.
Who wants to add? Dragan?
Just kind of a few points. I haven't, wasn't, there yesterday, I think, in terms of what was this workshop about. So obviously kind of risk is very important. But when I see kind of things going wrong is sort of defining the risk in the first place. And it's happening over and over again. Because the business will take action on a risk, but in the first place you need to get your risks right. And I think the sort of elements you take into the consideration now, there's various methodologies and things you put in place. But I feel this should be more scenario-based. This should be kind of more business kind of process-driven exercise to define how various departments around the business use data. What kind of technology enablement services we have within the business, so we can define what is the overall risk for the business as a architectural kind of representation, and where you need to sort of take considerations in place. Are we ready for this new age? And I feel the sort of confidentiality, availability, integrity you put alongside those risk statements completely meaningless in today's world, because somehow you need to put CIA just because your template implies so, and then you realize, okay, your mitigation plan is completely wrong. And sort of really kind of revolves around that idea, so the perception of risk and definition of risk, which is very difficult, obviously. I think it becomes a science, altogether now.
Okay, so we have 2 or 3 minutes left, so I would move to the sort of closing remarks of each of you. Maybe a little bit around, so one of the questions we had prepared up front was, should companies build zero trust security by design? Maybe we add a how in front of that, so how to do that, a very quick and short and concise recommendation on what is your sort of best advice you can give on that. Thorsten, do you want to start?
Sure. So for me, as the other keynote speakers pointed out, zero trust is a journey. There's a path to a journey. The path will differ based on who you are, what your business goals are. So you have to be flexible. But at the end of the day, for me, zero trust starts with identity and is followed with data. Ensuring data integrity, these are 2 foundational elements for zero trust. And building around that later on will make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Just final thoughts is, again, coming back to the data strategy perspective, that really will inform architecture and security you desire, your business will require. And from that perspective, whether you're on the spectrum of control or flexibility, will define the level of security, the type of security you need to put in place. Some of the emerging concepts, which will go beyond the typical security things we have in place, which we've been having for decades, would definitely help. And if we would think that it will take time to mature, I think they're still kind of, they're already there to be materialized in the goals of the modern enterprise, as in data veracity, verification, for verification purposes, and clearly kind of providing that back to the business to say, guys, we're here to enable the business rather than just protect and make it compliant.
Paul?
Yeah, for me, it starts with working with your business to understand your business. If you don't understand the business and what their business drivers are, actually you can't develop an architecture to enable it for the future. So it's a joint exercise, and it starts with that. And from that, you end up with a roadmap, and from the roadmap, you end up with technology solutions for today, in the knowledge that those technology solutions will need to evolve for the future, and that's ultimately how you pick your partners.
Okay, thank you. And it's always good to start with the requirements, not with the tool, so to speak. Thank you very much to the panelists for this very lively conversation.